Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Daventry District Council. We're now here for the Appeals and Standards Committee. It's 6:15 on Tuesday, the 9th of June. First item on the agenda is to sign the minutes for the meeting last year, the annual meeting held on the 13th of June 2019. Now, I'm going to ask if all members are happy for me to accept those as a true record of last year's meeting.
Agreed.
I wasn't present last year, obviously, so elected in July. So
that's fine, Councillor Harris. I understand. So everyone's in agreement to that. That's great. So I can now move on to the second item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence.
Apologies received from Councillor Deanna Eden and from Terry Regan, Chair.
Thank you. So other than that, we have a full house. Okay, now item number 3 then, it's declaration of members' interests. If anyone wants to say whether or not they have any members' interests.
None from me.
None.
Okay. And then, right, I'm moving on swiftly then to item number 4, which is annual review of standards and of conduct and complaints handling. So that's the annual review of what we've done as a on the standards point of view from Daventry for the last year. If I can move over to Jill Kennedy, just to give us a very brief overview of this. This was to be presented tonight by Tony Gillett. Unfortunately, Tony's ill today, so he can't come to the meeting, but Jill's very kindly stepped in at the last minute, so please forgive her. She's not probably going to have as much information to hand as Tony might have done, but we'll allow Jill to give us a brief update.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is your committee's annual review of the Council's actions during the previous year to promote high standards. If I can bring your attention to a few points within the report. Under 4.1, at a national level, we have been awaiting the outcome of the report by the Committee on Standards in Public Life on local government ethical standards. However, the government has not yet considered those recommendations, so the position on sanctions remains unchanged. Now, locally, there have been 2 mystery shopper visits by independent members during the past year. The first of which was to a parish council where there had previously been some concerns. However, following that visit, the member reported that there were no issues to report. The second was to a Daventry District Council full council meeting. And again, there were no concerns reported, and there were some positive practices that were identified as a result of that review. There was a third mystery shopper activity that was due, but unfortunately that was cancelled due to the recent COVID outbreak, and as a result of that. Generally on complaints handling, there have been 3 code of conduct complaints received during the year, all related to parish councillors, and all the cases were closed without the need for further action following an initial assessment. The appendix to the report details the complaints along with redacted copies of decision notices. I commend the report to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have, this is going to be a resolved item, so we don't need a proposer and a seconder. I will just ask for the members and members of the committee to either agree or not. But we have a resolved item. I'll read out. There's 3 items here. There's number 1, that the annual review of standards of conduct and the handling of complaints is noted as a positive record. 2, the occasional use of members of the committee as mystery shoppers continues. And 3, a 2019/20 Code of Conduct key messages summary is supplied by the monitoring officer to parish and town councils based on experience of the past year and copy to members of the Appeals and Standards Committee. So are there any members of the committee here that would like to speak on this particular item at all?
Chair, a point of clarification from me, as I'm new to this group, this is my first meeting. In terms, I'm obviously familiar with the notion of a mystery shopper. Is that literally a mystery shopper, or is it somebody that identifies themselves, or will it be obviously somebody obviously who's there to do that role?
It should be somebody that will not announce themselves to the meeting when they arrive. So they are a complete mystery to that particular meeting. I don't know whether or not they actually sort of announce themselves after the meeting to say they've actually been or not. There's no obligation, I don't think, to do that. So the meeting that they go to will be completely oblivious to the fact that somebody's been there, say, just watching on them to see what's going on.
So effectively is a member of the public in essence then?
Yeah, as far as the people, the meeting they're going to, they won't know that that is not a member of the public. Yeah.
Okay.
Chairman, certainly when I attended, I have never announced myself either before or during or after.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. So are there any other members that wish to speak on this item, or can I move that it be resolved? Okay, I see no faces saying they want to speak, so I shall move for it to be accepted or resolved, as I've just pointed out the 3 points. So all those in favour, if you'd like to raise your hand. I can't see your hand, Steve, if you're in favour or not. Are you in favour?
Chairman, I'm not a voting member.
Oh, sorry, you're not.
Councillors vote.
Yeah.
We members don't.
Yes, that's right. Apologies. Yeah, so that looks like it's pretty much unanimous that we accept that. So that's a resolved item. We can move on to the next item here then, which is the public disclosure of contact details for members. Just a little bit of background on this. We had for Councillor Harris, who hasn't been on the committee for a while, only just come on, sorry. We had a training session last year and members raised this as an issue that they'd like to be explored. So the monitoring officer, which was Simon Bovey at the time, took this forward as a piece of work. So I'll move over to Jill just to give us a bit of an update on, or a bit of an outline of what this is all about.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As you say, it is concerning the public disclosure of contact details for members, and as the report outlined, it was raised by members at a member learning and development session, and Simon Bovey, as the monitoring officer, committed to explore the issues. The concerns relate in the main with regard to the publication of personal addresses for councillors. So some considerable research has been undertaken into the practice of other councils, and that is detailed in the appendix of your report. And again, from the nationally, from the Appeal and Standards Committee standpoint, the Committee on Standards in Public Life have also been looking at this issue, and so the recommendation in the report is that your committee can join in the call really for a prompt decision on the register of interests part of that recommendation by agreeing to your chairman writing to the Prime Minister to that effect.
Thank you, Jill. Yes, so as Jill says, I mean, we had it raised as an issue at our member development session. I think members were a little bit concerned at that time. It was, I suppose, not particularly long this time after one of the MPs had been sadly attacked and murdered. So there was a little bit of concern about people's public details being on public record. So we did some research into that, and you'll see that in the report and the appendices as to what other councils are doing and what generally councillors tend to do in different parts of the country. There's no sort of like set way that certain councils do things, but they all do it in a slightly different way. And there are councillors here and other members of the committee need to realise that there's about 2 or 3 different ways in which public information can be put on, in the public domain, as it were. Because if you stand as a councillor, then you have the issue of around the election side of things is separate to when you become a councillor, and what information you then disclose later on, and what you disclose on your register of interests information that goes onto the council's website as well. So that's all been covered in the report. But I think generally what we're being asked here is that whether we agree with an item here that we push the central government to put into place its recommendations from their subcommittee on standards in public life's report entitled Local Government Ethics Standards. There's an item in their recommendation number 2 in there, which basically says that anybody in public life has a right to have their public or their private details taken away from the general public, so they cannot be identified unless they wish those to be put forward. So ultimately it would be an issue down to each individual councillor or anybody in public life or in public office, really, if those recommendations were to be accepted. But it gives you the option there if you feel a little bit vulnerable or if they've got a particular issue. At the moment, the monitoring officer can consider requests from individual councillors to have their information taken off the public record if they have a particular issue which may address or may compromise their security. But it's down to the monitoring officer to make that decision. And it's by no means guaranteed that the monitoring officer will allow that to happen. So going forward, so it's a resolved item that myself as chairman of our committee here writes to the Prime Minister urging a prompt decision to be made on recommendation 2 of the Committee on Standards in Public Life's report as relating to registers of members' interests. So that's what I'm going to put to you now as to whether you feel happy.
May I make a comment, please, Chairman?
Oh yes, sorry, yeah, if you'd like to come in, yeah.
I mean, there are a couple of points which I'd like to make, and these are not standards matters. These are matters from a member of the public to councillors. The first thing is, of course, that historically it has always been known by councillors that they declare their addresses and they've been contactable. So to remove that is quite a big change. I think it is quite important that when we are voting for somebody, that we should at least know whether the person that we are voting for is very local or is distant. So I think that's a very important point. And the next point I'd like to make is that when one is hiding behind a .gov.uk address, and one can be remarkably invisible. And I, over the course of the years, have made contact with quite a number of councillors, and I would have to say that if you write to their home address, you almost always get a reply of some sort. Whereas if one writes to the Daventry District Council address, some are very good at replying and some are remarkably poor. So I think that we should be very, very aware that I know that you councillors want to do your best to represent your the people who vote for you, and please just be a little bit careful about how distant you make yourself. I mean, certainly I don't think that declaring your postcode would do any harm whatsoever, and it would certainly give people a very fair idea of where you do or don't live. I mean, if you have a CV postcode and you're a Daventry District Councillor, then at least one knows that they're not got somebody who lives in the immediate area. I'd like those points to be taken into account, please.
Okay, thank you. Those points are noted.
Chair, could I make some comments also?
Yes, Councillor Harris.
I really, just to echo the points from Mr. Loads in a similar fashion, I'm relatively new to council. I was elected, as members will know, in July, and I feel very strongly that as a representative of the local people, they should have access to you. And access for me means mobile phone number, it means an email address, which might be an alternative email address to just the council address. And I appreciate it is a difficult issue at the time of going through the election process. It is one of those things that you do start to get a little concerned about. But I guess on balance, I feel quite strongly that as a local representative, you should be as available and as public as you can. I'm aware that there are some councillors who give simply the council office as their contact number. I understand the reasons for doing that, but personally, I think it's not that great if you need to get hold of a representative fairly quickly.
Thank you for that point. Just to come back on, so firstly with Councillor Harris, is that I think this is more in relation to addresses, as in physical addresses. Yes, I mean, I would agree with you that there should be a way of people being able to contact you by telephone, and a mobile phone number is always a good way of doing that, and an email address as well. I think the issue here arose, I think, largely around the potential threat of violence or anything like that if people's home addresses were to be known. That's what the issues that were raised at the members' training session were. And I suppose what we're saying here is that we're not recommending that everybody actually does take their address off, but it's the opportunity that should there be an issue, then it's easy for them to actually remove their address. But it does actually, with the internet going forward, I mean, obviously, if your address has ever been on the internet at any one point, it's probably quite easy for people to actually search for it, even if you take it off a website. And going forward with what Mr. Loads has said, I mean, with regard to the postcode, you'll probably be aware that there are some postcodes in the Daventry district that actually do have a CV postcode anyways. The ones up by the top end near a rugby do have a CV postcode anyway. So, but I appreciate what you're saying is that I think when you stand for council, you are allowed to have your home address taken off the electoral papers, which is a separate issue to what we're talking about here, because it's not a standards issue. But and you can have it put down as address within the constituency or address within the district. So that gives the public a knowledge that you are within the district and not and you have to be within the district, or at least live or work within the district to be eligible to be a councillor in the first place. Councillor Howard, you had your hand up, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, just I agree that the individual councillor should have a choice in this. Speaking as somebody who has got their address hidden because of being a victim of stalkers and violence towards me and my child, I think, yeah, members should have the right to make a decision whether to have it hidden or not.
Right.
As well as being, obviously, they always need to be contactable by other means, but a personal address, it can be very frightening when someone's on your door.
Appreciate that, Councillor Howard. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I mean,
sorry, Chair, can I make one other just quick comment? And I completely accept Councillor Howard's point there. It's in regard to the, I guess, the register. My understanding again is that the register is there for other means. Effectively, if there are a number of properties that a councillor might have a vested interest in, or land or anything of that nature. So would there be any potential clash here at all in that issue? Because obviously that's there for other reasons, maybe for planning or what other issues might occur. So it's just a question really as to whether that there's a potential clash there if that's removed.
I'm not entirely sure, actually. I think probably we're talking largely about the councillor's home address, an address which they reside at, which they may not want the general public to be able to know about because of issues that Councillor Howard's already explained. I mean, I'm perfectly happy. I mean, I've always had my address publicised, never a problem. You know, you do get the odd person that turns up on your doorstep on a Sunday morning and wants to talk to you about something, but that's part and parcel of being a councillor. And I take on board what Mr. Lokes has said, is that, you know, the general public do want to be able to contact their councillors. But equally, if there's an issue going forward that you feel a bit you know, scared that some people may want to stalk you or to target you, to give violence or etc. towards you, then you should have the option to be able to take that away. I mean, as chairman of this committee, I personally would have no problems with that option if it were to be made law, as it were, going forward, which is what I suppose what we're saying with this report, is that we're asking the government to make a decision about what it wants to do. It's already recommended that that councillors will be allowed to hide their home address, and that's one thing that we, as a committee here tonight, have been asked to perhaps put a little bit of pressure, as much pressure as we can, as a small group, but to actually make a decision on whether they're going to incorporate that into law or not. But going forward with the other issue, if you've got several parts, several properties that you own, I think this would only probably relate to the first, the home you actually live in, I think, unless I don't know whether Jill's got any further information that you might be able to impart on us regarding that, but I think that's probably the case. Is that so?
I believe so, Chairman. I think, as you've said, this is about contact details for members of the public. Members would still have to declare their address to the council, and would clearly still need to abide by the register of interests and declaring any other property that they owned.
Yeah. Okay. I've got two speakers on here. I've got Roger Lowe and Councillor Howard. So Roger Lowe first.
Yeah, I'm just to say that I think Councillor Howard has given us the perfect reason why we have to support the option.
Okay, thank you.
Not give your address. It's fairly straightforward, I think.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Howard, what would you like to come back on anything?
Just to add that when I have been going through my issues, the police at the time also recommended that this sort of thing should be an option for members.
Okay, thank you for that. So, does anybody else like to speak on that?
One final quick point, if I may. Does this recommendation, I haven't seen the full legislation or the full dialogue that's taking place on this document, but does it recommend that there is a minimum personal contact, at least, of some description? I take the point completely about the home address, and I think that should be a personal choice. I completely hear that. I guess my concern is about that visibility piece. From a local council point of view, I really do feel very strongly people want to know who you are, they want to know how to get hold of you. And I think it's more about at least having that accessibility in some form. But I presume that, again, is optional as opposed to anything specific in this work in the public life report.
Yeah. So I don't know whether it specifically mentions anything to do with telephone numbers or email addresses. I think it's more to do with a physical address. Okay. I will perhaps just defer to Jill Kennedy is to know whether she knows or could find out if we don't know tonight. We may want to perhaps make it clear then if we do agree tonight that we put a caveat in there saying that we accept that a private address may need to be taken away, but we would fully support having an email or a telephone number being put forward. But obviously telephone numbers have their own issue, I suppose, as well. At least with an email, if you are being harassed, you can probably block an email. I suppose you can probably block a telephone call as well, but it's perhaps not quite as easy to block a telephone call going forward as an email. I don't know, but Jill, have you got anything you can add to that, do you think?
Not on the detail, Chairman, but I can certainly check that out and let Councillor Harris know later.
Yeah, we may. I mean, if we do agree tonight that we are going to support this recommendation or this resolved item, that we perhaps, depending on what Jill manages to find out, as to we may want to put a caveat or in there to say that we would accept that email addresses and telephone numbers aren't things that we would think that people could take away, and we respect the fact that people need to have local contact with their councillors. So
yeah, I would be happy with that.
You'd be happy with that, would you, Councillor Harris?
Yeah.
What about Mr. Loads? Would you like to come back on that at all?
I mean, Chairman, of course I understand the point about a personal address, but the declaration of a postcode is something a little bit different, but it does give one a fair indication of the person, of whether or not the person that they are voting for in their ward is local to them. And of course, you wouldn't be able to walk up to somebody's door under those circumstances. I wonder whether that is worth consideration.
It could be. I mean, we perhaps throw it open for discussion tonight. I mean, my view on that is postcodes are quite specific. I don't know whether Councillor Howard would like to come in at all on that. But if you've got a postcode that perhaps covers, I don't know, one street, it doesn't take much intelligence for someone who, if they're particularly dedicated to stalking somebody, to actually hang around a particular street until they actually see the individual that they're looking for. Councillor Howard, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I do appreciate, that the postcode would indicate whether you're local, but I also think if it's stated what you said, Chair, regarding whether or not they actually live in the district, I think that would be enough, because my personal case was that someone camped out on my street to find exactly where my house was as well.
Yeah.
Regardless of them knowing the actual details, they wanted to make sure. So I wouldn't be in favour of a postcode.
Right. Would any of the members of the committee like to comment on that at all?
Again, I have great understanding for Councillor Howard and the situation that can occur. But I guess I sort of support Mr. Loads in this, in that I've got a very strong view about local representation. And, I think that the challenge for us as local representatives is to make sure that we are local representatives. And, I think it doesn't serve our local people well if we are putting people forward who are the other side of a district, for instance, to represent them. I personally just don't think that. I know there's nothing to stop that fundamentally, but personally, I think, I would advocate that people respond best to people who are local because they can speak on their behalf. So that's my caveat, I guess, supporting Mr. Loads' view.
Yeah. Well, I think what I'd like to come back on to Councillor Harris on that, I suppose, with regard to the election side of things, this is separate to once you're already a councillor, you see. I think with elections, you are allowed to stand as long as you live or work within the district as a councillor. And going forward with the new shadow, that will be an even bigger area, won't it? So, I mean, there's issues there. But when it comes to elections, and maybe Councillor Howard could perhaps enlighten us on this, having some experience in that, that you are allowed to actually say as long as you live within, you could say I live within the district, and that's all you need to say. But I take on board what you're saying, Councillor Harris. Councillor Howard?
I would say that would be down to the individual's election campaign. They can purely campaign on the fact that they live there, and they can put different details on their election literature. I think, but moving beyond that point, I mean, a councillor can move around the district, or from one place to another within the same village once they are elected. So I think it's down, it's how you get elected, is how, for yourself, Councillor Harris, being local played a massive part for yourself. So I think now you're elected, your people know that you're local, and that's the reason why they voted for you.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. We've got Roger Lowe would like to speak, if you'd like to.
Yes, I mean, it's an interesting discussion, but I come back to what we're resolving, which is a committee's made some recommendations to the government, and we just resolved to urge a prompt decision on those. I don't think there's any merit or mileage in us making any additional comments or saying how it should be altered or what should be added to it. We're just resolving to ask them to make a decision on something that's already in print.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there. Yeah, I mean, I think it's about time for us to put this to the vote then, that resolved on the resolved item that we've got before us as is, and then if it were to come into force, then it's down to individual councillors to decide what they wish to do with regard to that. So I put it forward then that we have a resolved item that the chairman of the committee writes to the Prime Minister, urging a prompt decision to be made on recommendation 2 of the Committee on Standards in Public Lives report. And I put that to us now. Those in favour of that, would like to put their hand up, and I will say if there are some against, then I will count those in a minute. But those in favour. So we have 2 members of the committee. Mr. Loads is a non-voting committee member. So those against, and so we've got nobody against, anybody abstaining? So Councillor Harris wishes to abstain on that, that's fine. So we have two members of the committee in favour, no objections, and 1 abstention. So correct me if I'm wrong, that should be that's passed and resolved. I don't know whether any members want their particular vote to be recorded against their name, or we'll just have it down as a 2 for and 1 abstain. Councillor Harris, do you want to have it recorded at all that you were against? Or?
Yeah, well, I'm not against, I'm abstaining, and I guess as a guess, I'd see both sides, but for me it is about that localism piece, and that's the reason for my abstention. Okay,
it's fine. The committee clerk, maybe we want us to put down that we had 2 individual members and 1 that was abstaining, and Councillor Harris abstaining. Okay, thank you for that. And we'll move on to the next item, which is item number 5. Sorry, no, just done that one. Item number 6, urgent business. Is there any urgent business that's been notified? So no urgent business notified. I'd just like to perhaps just point at this point in the meeting, just to clarify, this will be our last meeting as Daventry District Council for the Appeals and Standards Committee. As members will be aware, that the Shadow Authority has commenced, and it had its first meeting last week. And going forward, there will be an Appeals and Standards Committee on that new body as a shadow, and going forward as the full council, or the main council, as and when that is actually constituted. The understanding is that will constitute fully from the 1st of April, I think, 2021, subject to any changes that the government might make due to COVID, if that has any impact on it at all going forward. But just so members of this committee are aware, at last week's Shadow Authority, I was put in place on there as the chairman of the Standards Committee for the Shadow Authority going forward. So I'll be working, trying to standardise, I suppose, the policies with regard to appeals and standards across the whole of the West Northamptonshire area going forward in the next year. I'm not sure whether any of us, Councillor Howard and Councillor Harris, are you on that? You're not on there, are you? I don't think, but going forward, we'll hopefully try and make sure that all councils in the West Northamptonshire area have, a very similar policy going forward for appeals and standards. And then obviously going forward into the new authority proper, we'll see how that goes forward. But thank you very much for your attendance tonight, everybody, and your input. Roger Lowe, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, there was a comment earlier that we should continue with the mystery shopper.
Yes.
Initiative, but that doesn't seem much point in that, does it?
I mean, going forward, I suppose.
Who would I be reporting back to?
Well, until the 31st of March 2021, you'll be reporting back to Daventry District Council because the shadow doesn't have any powers, as it were, with regard to delivery of service until the 1st of April 2021, as things stand. So going forward, if we are to have mystery shopper visits, then yes, you would report back to Daventry District Council. And I think it's always, it's good that we do carry on with those in the next few months. We haven't got many months left. But
so can I just be clear, does this committee cease to exist, or we won't have another meeting?
Well, I understand that this particular committee will dissolve when the new authority comes into proper being and actually starts delivering its services.
So that's in a year's time?
From the 1st of April 2021, yes. Right.
So, I mean, we're saying it's the last meeting, but of course, there could be a reason to have another meeting.
Potentially, yes. I say this is our annual general meeting, really.
That's annual meeting, fine. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to be clear on that. Thanks.
We could do. I mean, depending on what happens going forward in the last few months, we might have to have another meeting. We may need to have a panel convened to discuss a particular member's conduct, or also another part of our committee is that we are an appeals committee for staffing issues as well. So if there are any staff issues going forward, we might need to have a panel convened to discuss those. But so as far as I'm aware, this will be our last formal committee meeting. We may need to have some further meetings convened if there are any issues that crop up with regard to member conduct or staffing issues.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear. That was all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Great. Okay. Well, so that's the exhaustion of the agenda tonight. So thank you very much, members, for attending tonight, and I'll draw this meeting to a close at I think it's 18:53. Thank you very much for attending.